perspective. Amit Mitra, Dr. Amit Mitra, former Finance Minister, West Bengal, joins us. Just a quick comment, Dr. Mitra, from you, because we are running slightly over time. You know, Mamata Banerjee's comment, or the Trinamool Congress saying that this budget has nothing for the poor. Tell me one thing that you would have done, given the constraints that the government has in this post-pandemic period, that they haven't done.
It simply provide demand stimulation by transferring cash to the common people. When they bring the demand, of course, the supply side would respond. But let me also add, you've just debated on the Manrega issue, but you have not said that agriculture, no increase. Rural development, no increase. Is this a conspiracy that you cut Manrega by 25%? Don't increase agriculture, don't increase rural development, no increase in health. No increase in health. Education, just a minor increase. Corporate tax rate in India has come down to 25%, but your and my tax is 42%. Our individual tax, couldn't that be a stimulant that you reduce tax, demand will increase, savings will happen? So my submission is, with 3 crore people unemployed, massive inflation rate of 8%, of 14% wholesale price index, what are you talking about? The state was given 1 lakh crores, right? That was a state thing that you were probably going to say.
Yeah, because there are questions that the states themselves have not spent enough. You can blame the center, but you haven't spent enough of the allotted expenditure.
And what is interesting is, Rajdeep ji, West Bengal's rate of growth last year was 1.2% positive. But India's rate of growth was minus 7.7%. Take a lesson from that. Why? We stimulated demand by giving cash to the common people. Now, this 1 lakh crore that you're talking about, that they have given us, it comes with 5 conditions. This is anti-federalist. It again, 4% you're being allowed to accommodate in your budget. That comes with condition. So basically, this is an anti-federalist policy.
Okay.
That you go on saying things to the... Do you know that last year they cut what they transfer to the states in terms of taxes they collect? They cut 11,000 crores to West Bengal alone. You have not paid me 4,400 crores of compensation for GST. How do you expect the states to function? Then you give 1 lakh crores with a conditionality which nobody will meet. No state will meet.
Okay.
This is bluff.
Okay.
I'm sorry. This is unusual. And you talk about it.
I'm going to leave it there, Dr. Mitra. Clearly, you've highlighted concerns that the states have. And obviously, those concerns hopefully will be registered. But as always, I appreciate you joining us for that brief intervention here on the news today. Now, let's widen it. We've got 2 fine minds who I have spoken to earlier today. Amit Khan, CEO Niti Aayog, Montek Singh Ahluwalia, former Deputy Chairperson of the Planning Commission. And I'm going to talk to each of them individually. And let's start with you, Amitabh Kant. The government claims that this is a growth-oriented reformist budget. The critics are claiming there is very little in this budget for those on the margins who are hit by the pandemic. How do you see it, Mr. Khan? How do you respond to the principal criticism that is being made against the budget, that it is doing little to reduce the inequalities in the short run during the pandemic times?
So Rajdeep, I tried to look at the welfare schemes, did a comparison of BE for 21-22, the budget estimates, and I looked at the budget estimates of 22-23. And I looked at the fertilizer subsidy, which has gone up from about 80,000 crores to 1,05,000 crores. I've seen that the PM Kisan has gone up. The PM Gramin Sadak Yojana has gone up. Majority of the schemes, including the National Education Mission, the PM Jan Arogya Yojana, the Jal Jeevan Mission, which has seen an outlay of another 10,000 crores. These are all rural developmental schemes. And to my mind, they put in a lot of resources. Close to about 9 to 10% of India's GDP goes into these schemes. So if you put so much of resources for rural areas, for poor, for those who've got impacted during the pandemic, they will have a huge impact as far as livelihoods are concerned.
You know, you're saying it will have a huge impact, Mr. Khan. The total subsidy budget bill by one estimate has been cut by 27%. Food subsidy, fertilizer subsidy, Manrega has been cut. Former Finance Minister P. Chidambaram saying this is the unkindest cut. The government then still says that because you're increasing capex, that itself will start a virtual cycle of investment and growth and create jobs. Is this government taking a big gamble with that?
No, Mr. Chidambaram is being very uncharitable, because you have to compare the budget estimates of 21-22 with the budget estimates of 22-23. As you go around spending, you make an increased allocation in the RE stage. So don't compare the RE allocation of 21-22 with the B estimates of 22-23. That is not apple to apple comparison. That's an incorrect comparison. You have to do a BE to BE comparison. There, we've done a complete analysis. The revenue expenditure goes up quite substantially as compared to 21-22.
You know, one of the other key concerns ahead of the budget was the need to revive MSMEs, micro, small, medium enterprises. Many of these enterprises have taken a huge hit in pandemic times, and the sense one gets, Mr. Khan, is not enough again has been done because of this K-shaped recovery, uneven growth taking place. MSMEs have been the worst sufferers. Would you concede that more could be done for MSMEs?
So Rajdeep, that's a very important point, and I am a great believer that MSMEs are very critical for job creation. The important thing is, one is that, you know, with this whole focus on capex expenditure, with 4.1% of the GDP for center and state being put into capex, will lift the whole boat of the economy up. That's number one. Number two, you should look at this budget in, the last year's budget, this budget in continuity, and look at it along with several other schemes of the government, because budget does not tell you the entire story. The production-linked incentive schemes, the national asset monetization, the national infrastructure pipeline, all, if you look at it in totality, you will realize that there's a huge focus on growth. And when growth takes place, it lifts everyone above the poverty line. It takes the poor above. It takes MSME above. But exclusively for the MSME, the credit guarantee scheme has been further extended, and increased allocation has been made. Also, additional allocation has been provided for the hospitality sector, which will provide a huge relief to the travel, tourism and the hospitality sector. And I think, to my mind, the credit guarantee scheme will do a lot of good to the MSME sector. They needed flow of credit. That is what it will do to them.
Some would say this is Keynesian trickle-down economics that you're banking on. There's also, though, some confusion, Mr. Kant, over disinvestment targets. There is some concern that the government says it will invest 7.5 lakh crore as capital expenditure, 34% jump also. But the question on the ground is, most of these investments announced in the past have not fructified, not taken place. So there's a concern both on capital expenditure not being met and on disinvestment targets also remaining very unclear, and therefore whether they will be met or not.
So two things. One is that this year we've been able to dispose of Air India, which was the toughest of the disinvestments. We've also just recently disinvested the Neelachal Ispat. Next year, you will see BPCL, you will see BML, you will see Concor. And if you look at it, last year's budget, recommendations have been made for 2 banks and 1 insurance company, all this together. So I am quite hopeful that you will see a lot of more disinvestment, including many other which have been recommended by Niti Aayog. So you will see a spate of disinvestment, and I'm personally very hopeful that you'll see a huge jump in disinvestment figures in the coming year. Secondly, whatever allocation you make for infrastructure and for capex, it's very, very important, and that's an important point you made. It's very important that we in the bureaucracy actually get our act together and get all these projects, because they require a lot of homework in terms of land, in terms of approval, in terms of forming the special purpose vehicle.
There's also confusion, Mr. Khan, over the crypto bill. The government hasn't quite banned cryptocurrencies. Instead, it will impose a 30% tax over the currency. So effectively, it's recognizing crypto, but it's making investment in crypto difficult with this 30% tax. And there is uncertainty exactly over how this digital rupee announcement will be taken forward by the RBI. Do you want to respond to this confusion over crypto and digital rupees?
So, Rajdeep, there is no confusion at all. Firstly, what the FM has announced is that the RBI will roll out the digital currency of the country. That means that instead of paper, instead of a paper rupee, you will have a digital currency with which you can transact both domestically and internationally. Now, cryptos are not being treated as a currency; they are being treated as an asset class, like mutual fund, like gold, like bond. Now, many people are investing in crypto as an asset class because they see their values going up in subsequent periods, and many Indians have gone drawn into cryptos. Government realized that it's not correct to ban cryptos as an asset class because it will lead to flight of capital, it will lead to flight of skilled manpower abroad. And therefore, what it has done is it's treated cryptos as an asset class, and it has taxed them with 1% turnover tax and 30% capital gain tax. But logically what it has done is that it says that it will regulate cryptos, and therefore in due course you will also see a regulatory mechanism for cryptos. Once you tax them, the regulatory mechanism will automatically follow in due course.
One final question. Leading into the budget, the big question was, how are you going to stimulate consumption in particular? There's still no, and create jobs. There's still no clarity in the short run how you're going to create jobs. More importantly, how are you going to stimulate consumption?
So, Rajdeep, budget doesn't provide you all the answers. The budget has to be seen in conjunction with the production-linked incentive schemes, which has been rolled across 14 sectors and has had an excellent response, as the finance minister said. You have to read it along with the national investment pipeline, and you have to read it along with the national asset monetization pipeline. All these are works in progress at a very, very advanced stage. All these crowd in private sector investment. And in fact, production-linked incentive scheme, which has had very good response across mobile manufacturing, electronic manufacturing, across advanced chemistry cell and automobile manufacturing. All this is leading you into the sunrise areas of growth. That is where the global economy will grow and expand in the coming years. And India's objective is to penetrate these areas of growth and become a global champion.
That was Amit Khan, CEO of Niti Aayog, speaking to me earlier. The other important voice I spoke to is the one you see on screen. I interviewed him earlier, Dr. Montek Singh Ahluwalia, former Deputy Chairperson of the Planning Commission. I began by asking Dr. Ahluwalia, the government saying this is a reform, growth-oriented budget. Critics saying this budget is only going to widen inequalities, has very little for those who've suffered the most in the pandemic. Where do you stand, Dr. Ahluwalia?
Well, look, it's good to have different views on the budget, and I think one should hear what the opposition says also. My view on this, quite honestly, is that if you're looking at whether it's promoting growth, I would say one thing that I'm glad about is that in the current year, she has actually accepted the fiscal deficit being a little higher than what she had originally targeted. Many people thought that because of better revenues, they would actually try to improve the fiscal deficit. I think that would have been the wrong thing to do. 6.9, which is actually going to be led by a big revival of expenditure in the later months of the year, is, I think, a good idea because the economy needed that demand boost. Coming to the next year, I mean, it was expected that she would make some correction to the fiscal deficit, and she's done that about half a percentage point, which I think is the right kind of level to do. But what is good is that there is a big demand boost as far as investment expenditure is concerned. So it's more led by investment than led by consumption. My view is that you do need to worry about consumption in a K-shaped recovery. That's looking at what can be done for those at the bottom. But if you want to get a broad-based recovery, the way to do it is to invest through capital expenditure in the infrastructure sector. That would be the best way of triggering a little bit later a revival of private investment. I think personally that they've not allowed enough for expenditure in Manrega, because it increased this year and is being reduced again next year. It's a demand-driven program. So if the feeling of the government is that, look, we're going to do so well next year that there won't be demand for Manrega, that's okay. But I think they should make sure that they fully meet the demand. So if there is demand, it shouldn't not get met because there's lack of resources. That's one thing. Second, and this I'm disappointed in, that we don't seem to be continuing the thrust on vaccinations. You know, of all the things in this highly uncertain world that would give India's recovery a pretty solid international credibility, is if people could say that our vaccination program is going well. Now, we know that the target was 100% all adults by December 31. That was not met. You know, I had said that, look, even if we meet 80%, that's not bad, but actually we only met 62%. Hopefully we are catching up. But that's not enough, because that's adults. Now there are younger people that have to get vaccinated. And more importantly, there has to be booster doses given to those who already have double vaccinations. Now, from that point of view, the allocation for vaccines is down to 5,000 crores compared to 39,000 crores in the current year. Personally, I would have been a lot happier if the finance minister had taken the opportunity in the budget to say that, look, this is where we've got on vaccination, this is where we are going to get. So 100% won't happen right now, but it'll happen a little bit later, that we are going to have these booster doses, and I'm making enough provisions. In addition to that, I'm placing orders on the vaccine manufacturers in an adequate amount. I mean, part of the problem in the past was that orders were not placed. And I think that, to my mind, is a missing part of the budget, which, frankly, internationally, there's a lot of focus on, are people going to do a good job on vaccination? And we've been criticized for missing our targets. This would be a good opportunity to highlight this point. You know, otherwise, I mean, I think she's not done anything on taxation, and that's actually good, because business always gets very worried when people say that, you know, you've got to spend this and spend that, and they worry about more taxes. Fact is, tax revenues seem to be buoyant, so I personally go along with the idea that let's wait for the growth to come back. See, the critical thing is growth. Both tax revenues and employment are going to come if we can get the growth going. And how do we get the growth going? By giving a demand stimulus, and the demand stimulus is an investment stimulus. Those things, I think, are right.
Interesting. You seem to have a positive outlook in that sense to the budget. Let me ask you a second and final question. As I said, one of the concerns going into this budget was rising inequalities. 84% of households have lost incomes in the last 2 years. We've seen unemployment rise. Do you believe that there is anything in the budget that gives you hope beyond this gamble, as some are calling it, with investment? Would you believe that next year, this time, household incomes will be better off and the job crisis would have been resolved?
Well, look, I think on the inequality, you need to separate out what is the short-term problem as a result of the pandemic and the loss of employment, and a longer-term structural problem all over the world. The real crisis is because you've had a collapse of employment. And that collapse of employment will get reversed if the economy recovers. So, you know, the notion that growth is one thing and inequality is something else, it's true in the long term. In the longer term, around the world, because of the way technology is changing, there is a tendency for inequality to increase. But the short-term effect on the incomes of the poor is really the result of the collapse that the economy experienced, from which it's only just recovering. And what's more, it's a K-shaped recovery. So although overall GDP by the end of this year will go back to what it was in 2019-20, for a very large segment of the population, the informal sector, the MSMEs, that's not going to happen. And lots of jobs that have been lost in urban areas are not going to be recovering quickly. But the solution to that is to get the economy back, not sort of focus on all kinds of complicated things about inequality. There's time enough for that, and maybe we should discuss it. But I didn't expect that to be handled in the budget. That's why I personally feel that they should clearly say that, look, we think we don't need that much Narega, but if we do, we don't mind spending another 30,000 crores on it. Similarly, the PM Kalyan, Garib Kalyan Yojana, the free for the 5 kg of free food, that's supposed to end at the end of this year. We can extend it for another 3 months or 6 months if necessary. So retaining flexibility in those areas rather than restructuring taxation systems, inventing new schemes, that's always ineffective, quite honestly.
Dr. Ahluwalia, I appreciate your joining us and giving us your take on Budget 2022. Fine minds who've joined us on the show tonight. My take.